Royale National Park is a wilderness wonderland. It is remote, it's raw, it's rugged, and I just loved it out there. Plus, it's the least visited national park in the lower 48. All of these items and more are what drew me to this location and will likely draw me there again in the future. This is Latitude Photography Podcast, episode 133 for November 7, 2021. Welcome to Latitude Photography Podcast. I'm your host, Brent Bergherman. I'm so glad you're here. We're going to be talking about these images that I made on Royale National Park during the month, actually the first week, I should say, of September. I was gone on a big road trip from the beginning of September all the way to the very end of September and visited Royale National Park and then went to Minnesota's North Shore and then Theodore Roosevelt National Park and ended up at Badlands National Park. But we're going to be talking about today the images. Now, if you have listened already in the past to the audio version of the podcast, it was on audio only, where I gave you the day-by-day, account, as it were, of all the things that happened. Well, we didn't really focus on any images in that episode. I will link that down below. And incidentally, those of you who are watching here on YouTube, you get to see all the images, but this is also being distributed, broadcast, whatever you want to call it, on the audio only as well. So those of you in the audio only, you're used to this kind of a thing. It's just, I decided to up my game a little bit, and we're also out here on YouTube. So let's get right to this whole idea of what happened and how things went on Royale National Park. There is, however, one thing I wanted to talk about before I get to the actual pictures and everything like that, and that is a little bit of gear. This Goal Zero Sherpa 100 PD power bank. It was something that I did a little bit of research on. I was just like, I need something to power my camera and my phone when I'm out there and just in the wilderness and I don't have access to a plug. This device is airline ready. There are multiple ways to charge your devices. You can charge your computer using its built-in 60-watt USB-C charger. You have two USB-A ports that are 2.4 amps, and then it's the wireless charging compatible for your cell phones and other devices that charge wirelessly. And I really needed that because the port on my phone is dead. I have an iPhone 8, and it is just a dead lightning port, doesn't do anything. So I can only charge it via the wireless charging. And so this is just wonderful to have been able to have out there on the trail and everywhere. It has a lot of power too, which is awesome. Now the charge times, it only takes 2.5 hours if you use your computer's charger for it. And I used the charger for my MacBook Pro when I was in the hotels and such. I just plug that in, plug it on into the USB-C on this device, and it just charged up real nice and quick. It was great. And then other features, simultaneous recharge and discharge, which was fantastic. Now, certainly if you're going to plug in the USB-C, you're going to take up that port. And so you can't charge your computer or anything like that with it, but either through the wireless charging or with the two USB-A ports, you can then charge your batteries on your camera or what have you, while also charging this device. It does weigh 1.4 pounds. So this is part of that whole idea of I need to keep at 40 pounds or less when I'm going out on Royale National Park, because the ferry, they require you have 40 pounds or less or you pay them a whole bunch of extra money. I did not want to do that. And so just thinking about, okay, what's my weight distribution? What am I going to be doing with all of my stuff? Well, this is one of the things I knew I just had to have. Now, certainly there are a lot lighter options available for USB power banks. But this one, being able to charge my phone, was key. And then also it just has a boatload of power. If you had a standard power bank, a standard USB power bank, this would be equivalent to 25,600 milliamp hours. And that's just a lot of power. But again, it does weigh 1.4 pounds, and that's definitely significant. 7.5 by 3.7 by 1 inches, not too shabby. And I also have a container, a bag that held all of my cords and then also this on the other side of it. And was really convenient, really worked very well for the backpacking and then also the camping I did for the 3 weeks afterwards. So where is Isle Royale National Park? It is in Lake Superior. So I've got a custom drawn map here that shows us a little bit. We've got Upper Peninsula, Michigan. We've got Ontario, Canada, Minnesota, Wisconsin. And then Isle Royale National Park is actually a part of Michigan, which in some cases it might seem a little bit odd, but it is closer, a lot closer to Minnesota, about 15 miles from Minnesota, roughly 15 miles from Canada as well. And there it is. It is part of Michigan, though. So when it was brought over, when Michigan was made a state, basically it was added to that whole idea. Just zooming in a little more on this next frame here, and I kind of drew a little bit of a dotted line from Grand Portage to Wendigo. That's roughly the ferry path that you take when you're on the ferry. And it took about 3 hours to travel that 15 miles or so, or whatever it is. I did not measure it. I actually wanted to measure it with my watch, my GPS watch, but I just forgot. And I was just like, get me out of here, because I was thinking about doing it on the way back. And this next part is the part of the island where I visited, basically the southwest corner, or the southwest tip, I guess you could say, the edge, whatever, of the island. Now, the island overall is about 45 miles long and about 9.5 to 9 miles wide, somewhere in there. And on this map, you can see the little trails that I took. However, up beyond Feldman Lake, I continued drawing. These are all custom drawn maps, by the way. I drew these. I continued drawing that path, even though I did not go up that direction to Siskiwit Lake, I think that is, or Harbor, whatever it is. I stopped there at Feldman Lake and then went down to Rainbow Cove. I didn't mark that, but that little trail that goes down to the very tip, if you will, the very edge of the island, that's down to Rainbow Cove. So you land in Wendigo. I then went up to Hugginen Cove, hiked along the north path, then back to Wendigo, and then the 8.5 miles all the way down to Feldman Lake, stayed there 2 nights, and then hiked back to Wendigo, and then I was out the next day. All right, so a few facts about the place. Let's talk about all these type of different things. Is there cell phone coverage? No, there really isn't. Now, when I was at Hugginen Cove, I was able to connect to Rogers Cellular, and that's a Canadian provider. And because I have Verizon and I'm able to sign up then with their international coverage, it's only $5 a day when you are in Canada. Of course, I did it only one time, called the wife, shared an image on Facebook, and then that was pretty much it. But when I was at the very southern tip of the island, when I went down to Rainbow Cove, I did connect to a Verizon provider from the US, but I had to stand in right a certain spot. That was pretty fun. I walked down the beach just a little bit, very rocky beach, and I lost the signal. It was crazy. It is the least visited national park. In 2019, I'm going to go off of 2019 numbers and stats because those are the latest ones that we actually have that are, I don't know if I want to say reasonable, but, the history, when you look at the stats, you can see the history of the stats going, and then 2020 just screwed everything up. And then 2021 screwed everything up again because there was record numbers of visitations in virtually every park. And so in 2019, there were 26,410 visitors. And so it is ranked 60th out of 63 national parks. So that means up there in Alaska, I think is where they all are, there's 3 national parks that are less visited than Isle Royale. And in the show notes, either down below here on YouTube or in the audio, you'll see it in your app. I do have these links. If you want to go check out more stats and things like that for yourself, those links are there for you. It is, however, the most revisited national park. Now, I talked with one of the rangers on this and try to, get a little bit of more of a sense, how do we assess that? And he admitted it was just like, I've seen that stat somewhere on some website, but he couldn't tell me exactly where. But just anecdotally, of all the people that I talked to, a vast majority were there on a return trip. And they live in the region, whether it's down in, Minneapolis, St. Paul, or maybe they're from Upper Peninsula, Michigan, things like that. They had just been there several times before. Usually that's the case. And I'm trying to think. I think I only met one person who was like myself, and this was their first time on the island. The admission, so if you're going to go, be prepared to pay $7 per day unless you have a National Parks Pass. So that's very valuable for sure. Now, the National Parks Pass is currently $80. I was there for 6 days. That would have been $42, but I had these other two national parks I was visiting. It just made a whole lot of sense to have a national parks pass. Now let's talk a little about the size. 571,790 acres, 893 square miles. Like I had mentioned previously, the length and width, 45 miles long, 9 miles wide. And there's about 400 smaller islands arranged around the main island of Isle Royale National Park. And in some of those lakes that are on the island, there's more islands in those lakes as well, in the interior lakes. So that's kind of fun. And then the national park boundaries do extend beyond the island's shore about 4.5 miles. All right, 15 miles from Ontario, Minnesota, yet 56 miles from Michigan, but it's still considered to be in the state of Michigan. So how is it a part of the U.S.? Well, it was ceded or given to the U.S. by Great Britain in 1783. However, they were still in control. They still had people there. I didn't do a whole lot of research on this, but it wasn't until the War of 1812 where we finally gave them the boot that they exited completely. The local indigenous peoples, and I apologize if I get this wrong, Ojibwa peoples, they claimed it as their territory. However, they did cede it to the U.S. in 1842 in the Treaty of La Pointe. It is the only national park that completely closes down to visitors for a season. So from November 1 to April 16, I should say actually April 15, because April 16 is when it opens. But anyway, completely closes down, and you have to have extreme special permission, a researcher or doing something for the national park as an employee or something like that to get out there during that time frame. And incidentally, I should mention, when I left, it was September 12 that I left. And that was the last regular boat. And after that, there were no more planned flights either. So as you're looking to visit and such like that, once you get to mid-September, it really drops off. And then you still have access to it, especially if you have your own boat. But as far as the ferry is concerned, it really drops off, and you have a hard time getting out there and getting back at a reasonable time as well. I did meet a few people who said that when they were looking at the ferry schedules and such, they wanted to be there longer, but the ferries were just full, especially the ferry coming back. So that they then had to spend just a couple of days there instead of several days there like they wanted, like myself. Now, I made my reservation way back in May, and I was like, I just got to get this done, because I'm going through all my possibilities of plans and just trying to think what will happen. And I said, I just got to commit to something. So I went and purchased my ferry tickets, and that locked that in. And I wanted to go at the latest that I could for the regular ferry service, so I wouldn't have to be there super duper long time. And it worked out really good. I was really pleased to go there in the very beginning of September. Perfect time of year to go. Now, if you want some fall color, definitely go a little bit later. In general, go a little bit later. But it was a perfect time to go, and really virtually no bugs, and the wildlife was pretty decent. But I would not want to go in June, July, when it's actually a little bit hotter. It's not going to be that hot given the location, but the bugs are just going to eat you alive. All right, there's 165 miles of trails, 36 campgrounds, 1 hotel. It almost seems odd to be thinking of a place like this, how remote it is and how wilderness, which we'll cover in the next slide actually. But they actually have a hotel there up at Rock Harbor, which is on the other side of the island, the northeast side of the island. There is a hotel there. I think they call it a lodge. And then they operate other cabins. So down in Wendigo, they have a few cabins. And then the fellow that I talked with who was there in one of those cabins, he had mentioned that they had to get on their website. And actually, no, it was calling. You can't do it via the website. You have to call in. So you get onto the website to get the number, but then you just have to constantly call in. Well, he had made a reservation for 2020, which ended up getting canceled. And so he was assuming it would just be bumped to the next year, and it turned out it wasn't. So he was able to still get some time out there, but it was just a little bit more of a hassle than he was hoping for. But he said he called within 2 hours, I think it was, all the rest of the year for 2021 was booked up, and he missed out. Well, somehow they were able to squeeze him in of some sort. But anyway, it's very popular, and you want to be on top of it if that's what you want to do. The only way out there is to take a ferry, to take a float plane, or maybe if you're a good swimmer. I wouldn't want to do it, but if that's for you, go for it. Certainly if you have your own boat, you could certainly do it. There was a fellow in a yacht. I was in the visitor center when he came in, and I was kind of like, I'm just thinking, there's no way you are hiking out here, because when he came in, he was just going like mad, just out of breath. And from the dock up to the visitor center, that might be 150 feet of walking uphill. And he was just way out of shape, way winded. But yeah, it became obvious, he's on a yacht, and, he's just kind of circling the island. I was like, oh, well, that must be pretty sweet. I wouldn't mind that. All right. Something that's unique for this national park. It is 99.9% wilderness. Now, when I first heard this statistic, I was kind of like, well, aren't all national parks wilderness? And it turns out that there is a special designation for wilderness when we're talking about managing on a governmental level, managing the land, managing the property, managing everything that goes on in the land. And so for this national park to be 99.9% wilderness, so basically 0.1% not wilderness, I thought that was, once I learned about it, I thought that was pretty interesting. Now, what's the difference there? Well, we have these buildings. So in Wendigo, there's a little store. There's, the bunkhouses, whatever you want to call them, for the people who live there, the national park employees who live there all the time. Well, during the season, I should say. And then, of course, there's a restroom and a few other things right there at Wendigo. And then you can have the same thing, only larger, over at Rock Harbor. But otherwise, everything is pretty much they don't mess with it. They don't touch it. They don't do anything with it. And then when I was looking at the maps for Theodore Roosevelt National Park, only the southern unit, I can't speak to the northern unit because I didn't visit there, so I didn't pay much attention to it. But about half, maybe slightly less than half, is designated wilderness. And so I saw that and I thought, well, what about the rest of the park? And the rest of the park, that's where you have, say, the roads and developed overlooks and developed trails and things like that. Where the wilderness, you have nothing developed out there. You have a trail that is cut by the hikers, but it's still a dirt trail. And if something falls over it, eventually they'll get out there and they'll move that tree or whatever the case is. But otherwise, it is, as it says here, substantially free from the effects of modern civilization. And so when you're out here in Isle Royale National Park, there's 0 roads. There are pathways, certainly for walking and such, but there's just no chance that you're going to have any of these trappings, shall we say, of modern civilization, except for, of course, your tents that are made out of awesome, expensive fabric and things like that. But it is also not a quiet place. There's so many bugs and so many other things. That was one of the other things that I noticed. When you want to go out there and enjoy just the peace and quiet, well, it depends on how you define peace and quiet. The wind is always blowing, at least a little bit, and you hear just a little bit going through the trees, or it's just a gale force wind and it's just coming through. But my goodness, it definitely peaceful. Definitely, if you were able to sit and just absorb the place, definitely peaceful. Definitely, yes, wonderful stuff. All right. Also, untrammeled quality. Now, these ideas are coming off of the website, which is linked there, nps.gov/subjects and so on and so forth. So if you find that link, you can click there and it will help you understand what the untrammeled quality is and what all these other characteristics of wilderness is about. So that means, though, it's unhindered and free from the intentional actions of modern human control and manipulation. So, like I mentioned, with the idea in Theodore Roosevelt National Park, in the non-wilderness area, there's the big ring road, and they've got these developed places, trailheads and such, where here at Isle Royale National Park, there's none of that. There's very little at, say, the trailhead there at Wendigo, but then you just go off and this network of trails is where you go. Undeveloped quality, essentially without permanent improvements or the sights and sounds of modern human occupation. And once again, there in Isle Royale National Park, there was an area there where I saw the drain field for the septic system. That's part of the 0.1% of the non-wilderness area. The rest of it, of course, is wilderness. Then it has, again, as part of our character of the wilderness, opportunities for solitude or primitive and unconfined recreation quality. Definitely. I mean, I think I've already said that kind of idea before, where it's just peaceful. You get out there, if you're able to absorb the place, sit and relax, and you just have a wonderful time. And I don't know, I felt it very nice. Now, here's the one thing. If I were to go again, I would just change one aspect of it. I really didn't like this much remoteness for this length, this period of time, all by myself. And you might go like, oh, it's warm fuzzies, he wants a friend or whatever. Sure, there might be a little bit of that in the background, but what it's about is, well, there's a safety factor. You always have other people there for sure. But there's a safety factor when you're on the trail by yourself, whether you come across a wolf or a moose, or we had coyotes there too, I think. And then there's a bunch of smaller other things. But it's also just, I'm walking a fence here because I love being able to go on my own and to shoot with my own stuff in mind. But another thing of it is, there is something about the inspiration. There is something about the drive that you get when someone else is there with you. I don't think I had a problem with being motivated. I don't think that was my problem. It's just when you're doing the work, if you have someone to talk it over with, there's some good things that can happen there. Now, even if it was one of my boys and they're not a photographer, then it just gives me that extra something else to wrap my mind around. I don't know. I just found myself wishing I had someone else there. Towards the end, especially, I was just like, I think I'd rather have someone else going on. For the rest of the trip, when I was at these other locations, I didn't feel that same sentiment. And when, I think back to when I'm traveling by myself, whether it's in Europe or wherever else, South America, Central America, I don't have that same sense. But when it's that remote, for some reason, it just kind of like, maybe it's because my boys are getting older and I kind of wish they were with me. I don't know. Other features of the wilderness, they may also contain ecological, geological, or other features, scientific, educational, scenic, or historical value. Speaking of historical value, they do have a mine or two there on the island. There was some thinking, there was some initial prospecting going on for copper mining, and it didn't really turn out to anything. They were never profitable or anything like that, but there was some promise, at least, that they thought they had. Then it turned to fishing. So the fishing became a huge thing there on the island. But as far as the historical value, I tripped across one of the mines and you could see just a little bit of stuff left. And that's kind of cool. And their point then of the wilderness is they're not going to manipulate that. They're going to let it just be there. And as nature continues to take over and disintegrate this stuff, that's just what happens. And so they're going to let nature take its course with it. They're not going to come in and, build it up, restore it, whatever. It's just they're going to let it do its thing. All right, let's take a look at some of the images now. And once again, those of you in the audio only, these slide deck images, what I'm talking about here, they will be put in the Facebook group, and they will also be on the show notes website over there at latitudephotographypodcast.com/episode/133 is where you'll find this particular episode. All right. This island was definitely interesting because when you leave Wendigo and you're starting to get out on the trail, it does not take long for you to just be smacked upside the head, as it were, with this wilderness, with this rugged quality. And when that's not something you're, quote, used to shooting, it might take a little while for you to kind of get in that groove, as it were. And I was totally fine. There was nothing that caused me any problem or angst or anything, whatever else. There was nothing that was problematic with anything of it. It's just about that idea of inspiration, that idea of, what am I going to do here? You know, you can do all the research you want, but when you're there, and I didn't do much, I purposefully don't do much research when I go to a place, but when you're there in the flesh and you have the smells, you have the sounds, and then you reach out and touch. I don't know about you, but I'm actually one who will go up to this bark on this tree and I'll touch it. And I'll get that extra sensation of what it is for that texture. And maybe it's the rocks, maybe it's something else, but I love being able to go up to things and touching them and enhancing my experience with that object, if it's possible to do so. Obviously, some of these things are not possible to do so. So in this color image here, we've got this little twig with some leaves, and its background is this tree that's covered with some mosses or lichen. And it's all about that texture of the tree bark behind, and then these really soft leaves and the shapes of those leaves, the color of those leaves. I just really was intrigued. You know, this is probably after, 3 miles of hiking, because it took a while of seeing all of these things and absorbing all of these things and understanding, thinking about, how am I going to shoot this? What am I going to do? Rather than just diving directly in and saying, oh, I got to shoot. You know, it's more about getting to my camp and getting the big load off my back, but also just letting that idea absorb. When it comes to these roots, and I got a couple more here, I love doing shots like this. I did some in Nebraska when I was there in 2015, I think, or no, 2019. May have been 2019, the time I was there in 2019, along the Platte River. I did some. And here, you know, I think this is, if I remember right, it's white cedar. And these roots are coming in, but into the ground, but they're exposed. So some erosion has happened. And I just found it very interesting. The mishmash of all those lines, a little bit of the texture coming through. And of course, the contrast that we have from the very deep depths of underneath, with the light shining in on the bark on the outside. Just lots of cool things. It's chaos and order all in one. And here's another one where it's a little more ordered, where we see the tree trunk coming in a little bit more prominently, and then we have that breaking into the roots. And then in the evening, after I set up camp and actually went in, I ate lunch at one campsite. The neighbors were loud. There were 20-somethings, and I was just like, that's going to annoy me to no end. So I then went around the Cove and set up shop at campsite 1, which was actually all by itself. I was like, oh, I'm so glad I came out here. This is amazing. And then I shot some in the evening. Actually, I should be looking at these images, because these are what I shot in the afternoon after, I think it was after supper. And same subject, just two different takes on the subject, where the image on the left-hand side, we've got two of these main, very long root extensions, I guess is the best way that I can think to put it. But it also shows us some of the background information. We have more trees and rocks in the background. We have some cloudiness going on in the sky in the background. And then this image on the left-hand side, is a little more zoomed in. It's turned a little bit more to the right, so you get a little bit more of that, whatever it is coming in on the right-hand side of the frame, but it puts much more prominence on the one tree, the one root system going up into that tree. And so then that other item on the right and the left-hand side, it becomes less important. It's not the main driving element, or one of the main driving elements that brings you into the scene. So on the right-hand side, you know, we have two of these main roots, and they're connected actually halfway across by one of these roots. I guess I would love some feedback. What do you think is a stronger image? Because I like the one myself that shows more environment. It shows more of the location, more of the place, but it's just a different purpose for the image, a different outcome for the subject, I should say, when we zoom in on it and we just have a different framing, even though it's clearly the same subject. So I like them both myself. It's just they have different purposes. In this next image, when I saw it, I'm walking around on these rocks and I was just like, oh, this is nice. And the thing really that stuck out to me on this is the fact that we have this lichen on the rock, and that is the same color of orange as these turning branches, leaves, whatever you want to call it. They're in the foliage, in the little shrub. But also the fact that shrub, the roots just go into the rock and you don't see, there's no chance there's dirt in there. It's so amazing how these things are living and they're able to find nutrients somehow. But on this image, I was also experimenting with not experimenting, I was getting some examples that shows the difference of using a polarizer versus non-polarizer and what happens to that water in the background. By twisting the polarizer, you get this image where you cancel out all those sheens, all those reflections on the water in the background. If I didn't have that polarizer going, I don't have it in this presentation, but then you would have a very different image. The same exposure gives you a much brighter background. You don't have the color, and then you just have a much brighter background in it as well. These next two shots are turned to black and white. And whenever I have, especially this smaller one here on the left-hand side, whenever I have an image like this, I think back to a photographer who I was introduced to, I think it was about 2008 or 2009, somewhere in there. I was in my studies for the master's program. I have a master's in digital photography from Savannah College of Art and Design. And during those various studies, we were introduced to all sorts of different creators, different artists, and mostly photographers, but we had a few other traditional artists that we were studying as well. And I came across this photographer, and we'll look at some of his images in a minute. And so whenever I have this type of scene before me, I did this in Alaska and on Unalaska Island, and I've done this in other places, but I just start to think of Thomas Joshua Cooper and his images of the seascape. And just the simplicity that you can have of it, but also the story that it tells, that is, many times it's open to interpretation. So it's about the story that you, the viewer, bring to the image. And so whatever you're seeing here, it elicits some type of memory. It elicits some type of idea or understanding, rather than me telling you this is what you should be thinking about this image and this subject. It's more abstract and saying, here's a blank slate. What does it draw out of you? And so there is some interest to me in that type of image making. Now on this other one, the vertical image, went with a really long shutter speed. You can see the water action is just no action at all. And I promise you the water was not that calm. So there's no action at all, but it's because of really long shutter speed. And then brought out the texture a little bit in the post-processing in those rocks, and really wanted to keep the clouds super, super soft texture. And of course, having a long shutter speed allows that as the clouds move through the frame. So let's take a look at a few items here. They're really small because this is just a screenshot of an images search on Thomas Joshua Cooper. And one of the things, I don't know how long he'd made this a practice, but one of the things that really intrigued me that we were reading about his work was and now he was based in Scotland, I believe it was, again, at the time that I was reading all this and things. Who knows what's going on now? I haven't kept up with his work and what he's doing, so forgive me if his current work is different, but what I remember learning about was he would shoot an 8x10 camera, so 8x10 black and white film. He would go to this location. He would do a little research on it, but he would go to the location. He would set up his camera. He might be at the very tip of whatever he was going to. In one case, he went to Cornwall. In another place, I know he shot relatively recently, on Long Island in New York, but he's just been all over. And he would set up his camera. He wouldn't even take a meter reading. He would take one shot, he would pack it all up, and he'd go. Now, again, if he doesn't do that anymore, that may be the case, but that was a practice that he had for a while anyway. And quite frankly, I was like, that's gutsy. Now, you are shooting negative, and with enough experience, and you know the Sunny 16 rule, you can get a good negative, and you'll be able to pull something out of that as you print it. But still, that's pretty gutsy to say, this is the exact moment that I want to shoot. So anyway, it's under that idea where this inspiration of shooting these types of images kind of come from, where I look at them and I'm just like, yeah, that's actually, to me, that's very interesting. I love the open nature of this type of image, the idea of it being relatively a blank slate. We have a little bit more here on this image where the rocks are on the right-hand side, but still that cloudiness, that cotton candy almost texture that's in the water because of the shadows of the clouds above or what's ever in the water. You got some rocks in the water that are creating some shadows and things like that. There's a lot of murky mystery going on. And so it really is an open-ended image as it relates to how the viewer is going to experience the image and what exactly they're going to be thinking about as they interpret this image. The next shot here is my campsite. So I walked back along the cove and found this little piece of driftwood, basically, and decided to set up this shot one morning. And then you can see my tent nestled back there in the trees. And so I was just out there on this little almost peninsula type thing, very large campsite. It was such a great campsite. And then I was far enough away from the loud folks, even though the sound carried across the cove, usually I had enough wave action that would just drown them out. And that was just awesome. And then to the left of the tent, as it goes out to the rocks there, and then it just, they terminate, and the rest you have is lake. That's where I was shooting the most recent images that you saw there. And then way off in the background, you can see Canada. Just north of the campground, the Hugginen Cove campground, maybe a quarter of a mile, was this location, this bench of rock that I was able to climb down about 8 feet down from the main bluff area. And then the waves are crashing up over it. And I talked about this at length in, I think it was episode 131, where I talked about my process for making images. So I'm not going to go too deep here. If you want to head back to 131, I definitely encourage you to do that. But this is multiple exposures. So I have basically what we call exposure averaging going on. So it makes it feel like it's a longer shutter speed than it actually is with how those wave action items are coming in. And then just 4 of these images of this other end, this is the northern end of this bench area. And I just really loved all that I could do with this different wave action. Let's take a look at some of the details of some of these. I really enjoyed this one because of the form it gave to the rock. And we have the rock in the lower right-hand corner and the root in the lower right-hand corner. And then we've got the wave action going like mad there in the midground. And as the water has crashed up onto the rocks and then it's flowing back away, it's flowing back down, we just have this form that's coming to this rock that the water is crashing on that you just don't get otherwise. In this next image, we have the same idea of that rock, of course, but here the water's coming in on up to it and it's not yet crashed on it yet. And so the rock itself is empty of any water and the like. Both of these, all 4 of them here, and then these 2 that we're looking at in detail, they're all at half a second camera, shutter speed. And then this next image, I did not show this in episode, 131, but this one is at 2 seconds shutter speed. And just look at the very different effect. Now, of course, it's a different framing, so I guess forgive me for that idea, but the very different effect on the water. And I shared this in the Facebook group, and I had a lot of people say, yeah, that's awesome. That's really cool. This is, however, the reason I only did this a little bit was I really didn't like how, well, let me put it another way. I wanted to have a distinction in the textures between the rock textures, the water texture, and the cloud texture. And to me, when I do a long exposure like this, it becomes very similar to the texture of the clouds. And so, yes, I agree. This has its own, it stands on its own legs, so to speak. But I do appreciate the wave action myself in those other shots a little bit better. This next image I've also shared previously in the Facebook group. I call this my self-portrait. You can see my shadow there, and this is also it's cropped a little bit, so it's more of a horizontal image, more of a pano image, and really that little tiniest of waves right in the middle of the mid foreground area where that little tiny white cap wave is. I just love the fact that that's there. If that weren't there, I don't think I would enjoy this image as much for some reason. That just adds that little extra kiss of presence to the whole thing. And that's just beautiful. I love it. All right. This image, very, very quintessential idea of what the trail can look like there on Isle Royale National Park. And you might be thinking, wait, what? This is a trail? So the trail leads from the lower right-hand corner into those two big boulders in the background, and you have to walk between them. And you have this other route coming over this huge boulder on the left-hand side. And so this definitely is not what the entire trail looks like, but it's indicative of what many locations kind of can feel like, basically, because of the wilderness aspect. It's just all coming in on you. And there's just, I remember coming to this place and I was just like, how am I going to get through this? My big pack on, and it was fine though. Not a big deal. But I was like, I have to get a picture. This is just too good of stuff. Really good. All right. So on the last day there in Huggin Cove, I'm coming back out. This is another one of those exposure averaging ideas, although a lot more frames. I think it's like 10 or 12 frames. And just before this image was made, or images were made, just after these images were made, that's when the big wave, and I'm zoomed out a little bit here, but that's when the big wave came and just doused me and soaked the camera. And the camera didn't work for the better part of a day. And I was really bummed. But I did get this image, and I then had the remainder of that day to just hike and get a few images of my cell phone. I'm not showing you any of those here, but I did get a few images of the cell phone because I was like, well, look, I'm on this sabbatical project for my day job, and it is about the experience too, because the photos aren't the only thing I'm doing. I'm designing things for this sabbatical project. And so when you design something, well, reference photos are amazing. That's what I was there for. I wanted to get these reference photos. But I also wanted to experience the place, because when you experience something, you have a lot more connection to it and you can design your items more effectively, I'm convinced. That's what I teach my students anyway. So if you have an opportunity to go experience the place that you're designing for, that you're, in this case, also photographing, it's much better to absorb that and spend time there. And what was interesting when I'm telling people about my project and where I'm going, like, oh, I'm going to Badlands. Oh, go to this place, and this place. It was just like, yes, I know they are there, but that is not fulfilling the need for my sabbatical project. My sabbatical project requires me to spend time in a location so I can absorb it, so I can then turn out hopefully some good designs, some good poster designs that I'll be doing. So anyway, the camera was doused. It didn't work for a while, but it was near these locations, these two images here, the detail shot that I have of this downed log with this aspen tree with some moss growing out of it. I got this because this was very quintessential, iconic as it were, of Isle Royale National Park. And when I went into the visitor center and you take a look at all the different things they have for sale there, a prominent figure, a prominent notion or idea that came through with what they have available is the aspen bark and the patterns that are created with that. This other image on the right-hand side, this was one of I think the first image I took after I fixed the camera. So if you want that story, you have to go back to episode 130 or 131. I split that into two, 129 or 130. I should have referenced that. But anywho, I titled it The Logistics of a 4-Week Road Trip. So you can just look a little bit back in the catalog there, and you'll be able to find those episodes. All right, this is on the way to Feldman Lake. And with Feldman Lake, very peaceful place. However, I guess I can say one thing I didn't care for about Feldman Lake was the taste of the water. I have a filter, but there's still something that was coming through that was affecting the taste. And I have to admit, I didn't drink as much as I was drinking when I was pulling out of Lake Superior than Feldman Lake. It's very subtle, but there's just something there. It's kind of like, we're on well water here on the farm, and when I go into town and I can taste that chlorine, it's disgusting, but you get used to it, but otherwise it's disgusting. And this was the same kind of idea. Obviously it wasn't chlorine, but it was the same kind of idea, that subtle flavor that was just like, this is hard to get used to. This image on the left, one of those ideas, again, Thomas Joshua Cooper, but inspired, but really it's also about that fogginess. And I was just like, oh man, how can I encapsulate, how can I make the viewer feel the same way as best as possible that I felt? But then it's also interesting, we have those white little pebbles, they're coming in as little just white specks, in the wave action of the water. And I liked that coming through too. So I cropped in just a little bit to get rid of whatever was in the foreground, because I had, I think, a little bit of the tiniest of waves that were crashing in on the foreground. So I cropped that out so it would just be this, everything is serene and surreal and very calm. And on this other image over here on the right-hand side with this log splitting it right in the middle, I really appreciated this scene because of the entire differences that were represented here that I was able to capture. So the very bright background areas, upper areas, because of the fogginess. But then as you get closer and you change the angle of that reflection, you're just really looking into, and I would say I was definitely using the polarizer here as well. You're just looking into the water. You don't really see the surface of the water. You look through the water. And then I also like this shot where I crop out, and I actually framed it up this way, where I crop out those rocks on the lower left-hand side. It's just, I also like it with it. And I chose to just show this one since it was already processed. All right, one morning, it was like this morning, it was really foggy. Let's see, I think this was the Thursday morning. I hiked out there on Wednesday, so this would have been Thursday morning, I think. Oh no, this was Friday morning. And, it was great with the sun behind these clouds, behind this foggy clouds, whatever. And then, of course, silhouetting with the trees. Boy, that was just... And then it started to break out probably around 9 o'clock is when I quit shooting. I can't remember exactly. Now, these next two images, they're the same exact subject, just processed differently. This is when I went down. I took the trail down to Rainbow Cove from Feldman Lake. And with these rocks, again, another idea where I kind of receiving some inspiration, some energy, as it were, from Thomas Joshua Cooper. And let's take a look at these two different items, these two different processings. So with this image, what I like about it is it does place a little more emphasis on the rocks. I do think, however, the vignette is a little strong. I think you can actually see the vignette happening. And whenever I do a vignette, I want to do it subtle so you don't really see it and say, oh, that's a vignette. That's when it gets ruined. So I think I need to back off or just feather it out a little more. But on this, I like it too, where it's just bright and airy, where you have this sense of here's your starting point with these rocks, but then you're just lifted and you're released, kind of an idea. Whereas on this image, you're not lifted and released. You are just going around basically in a circle, whichever direction you end up going, but you're going from rock to rock to rock. And so you just have a different experience with the image. depending on how it was processed. All right, this next image came from Friday night. Some clouds were starting to roll in. Boy, howdy, it rained a lot on my trip, the overall trip, certainly here on Isle Royale, but when I got back to the mainland, oh my goodness, it rained a lot. It wasn't so bad because I was prepared for it, but if you're not prepared for it, you're going to ruin your day. And since I was camping, or in this case, backpacking, you're just part of the elements, and you have to be willing to accept that. But I just loved the texture in the clouds. It was amazing. When I processed this, I brought in some color grading. So in the shadows areas, I brought in this cooler bluish hue. In the highlights, I brought in this warmer hue. And I just thought that worked out really well. I set it so some of that blue still comes in on the bottom parts of the clouds. And so the highlights are only, the very brights are what turned a little bit warm. Just gives a nice atmosphere. All right, this next one was Saturday morning. I decided to go ahead and grab a shot because there was this huge system over the mainland, and we were on the edge of it. So out here on Feldman Lake was basically on the edge of it. It rained for about an hour as I was fixing breakfast and trying to load up camp so I could hike back to Wendigo. But this was pretty much what I saw right when I woke up. I had left the tripod out there thinking, well, if it clears out, I'll get some night shots maybe. That was not going to happen. But yeah, there was a significant lightning storm over there. It went through so fast, I didn't get any shots of that, but at least I was able to get this kind of really moody shot with all those interesting forms and shapes and whatever's in the clouds. All right, so hiked back that 8.5 miles. I don't think I took a single shot. And yeah, Saturdays are usually my day off, and it's my day to rest from all of that creative action, all of that work, if you will, that I do. And so I like to have that time away because it makes sure, it helps ensure, I should say, that the times when I am productive and I am creative, they are even more productive and creative than I would otherwise be. So what we did have, though, was a very unique opportunity. Just as the sun was setting here at Washington Creek. So Washington Creek Campground is half a mile from Wendigo, and it was just amazing to see this moose come through. Now, this first shot is when she first came down. Boy, howdy, I must have taken hundreds of images. She then went off across the other side of the creek for about a half hour. I ate my supper. I decided to go back down to the creek's edge because there was a stairway down there right next to my campground. And this time I got all the way to the water's edge. And I was just like, yeah, this is so peaceful. Just wonderful. And then all of a sudden she just comes barreling out of the forest on the other side. I was like, oh, let's go get the camera again. And so that's where these other images come from, when she barreled out and she came through and was just waltzing on through. And then this last image of her just really zoomed in. It is from the backside, but, focusing mostly as best as possible on her eye, on her muzzle, her snout, and the bubbles that she's blowing into the water as she's gleaning whatever's on the surface of the bottom. I don't know exactly what she was eating, but she was getting something there, and she was munching away on that. And then the next day was Sunday. I woke up way too early because that's just what I do. But I was pooped, and they have a little trail that goes right there around Wendigo, and I was thinking maybe I'll do that. But I was pooped, and I still needed some time to just physically rejuvenate, physically take some time off. And so I decided not to. I was just going to sit there at the pavilion waiting here close to the dock and read my book, which I'll show you in a second, and talk to the other hikers and campers and whatnots there. But this is the ferry coming in to pick us up. And of course, we have the ranger, the National Park Service ranger there that will help tie up the ferry and whatever else as we prepare to load. All right, so some additional reading that I have for you. Wolf Island, great book. It documents the research that was started in the late 50s regarding wolf behaviors and their relationship with moose population. So the wolf ended up coming across the ice to the island, like back in the 40s or something like that. And then they've had a couple of times where other wolves have come over, then they've gone back and things like that. But this fellow, he was a student at Purdue, and he was doing, he was getting his PhD basically. And so he was doing the research, starting the research on the island there. And there were plenty of people that came after him. In fact, I think they even say it's still ongoing. The thing about it is that they really started to understand the nature and the idea of wolf behavior. Now, I didn't tell you in this episode about the encounter that I had with a wolf. I'll tell you that briefly. When I was at Feldman Lake and I was zipped up nice and cozy about 9 o'clock at night or somewhere in there, about an hour or so after sunset, I was tired and I was ready to go to bed. And literally I had just gotten all tucked in, and maybe 2 minutes later, I then hear this kind of coming up and sniffing like crazy. And I instantly thought to myself, that kind of sounds like my dog. We have a little pug though, so very, very different. But there was enough relation in the sound that I was like, yeah, that's a wolf. Big breathing sound. And I could see I have this tiny little tent. And so, here's me, and then 3 inches to the side of me is the edge of my tent. And it's a single wall tent. And as he circled me twice, he had so much activity disturbing the air, I could see it in the side of the tent when he stuck his nose underneath the edge of the tent, hearing and seeing the action of his breathing. I'm just like, wow, this is a wolf. And I'm just getting excited. And I'm just like, I ain't doing anything to cause him to have any kind of reaction that would, encourage him to pull his teeth out and start wielding them like knives. So as soon as he left, I then unzipped and I stuck my head out. And then the gals in the campsite next to me, they just started going, it's all, they let loose. And after reading this book, I have a comment here. I was comforted to know that my behavior during my wolf encounter was likely the best course of action. And once again, the wolf was just curious. He was looking for some food probably, but he's just curious. He's not out there to gnaw my arm off. And for us to just go and just think that, the wolf, his only point and purpose is to come up to me and gnaw me clean off to my elbow, that's just, hopefully we can dispel that notion. The wolf can be very vicious when they're hungry and they're going to eat their moose. But as you read the book, you realize not only how many times they fail, which is most of the time do they fail in their moose hunt, but also the types of animals they go after. This is the kind of thing where the idea of survival of the fittest kind of makes sense. If you're a very fit moose, you're probably not going to, the vast majority of them are not going to be eaten by a wolf. If you're old, if you're diseased, if you're young, a young calf, those are the types of moose that the wolf go for because they can actually take them down. So as a human though, they pretty much are just like, what? You're not food. So in general, I think, and again, read the book, use your own common sense, but in general, it's just not something that we need to be super duper nervous about. The fear factor that has gripped society and has gripped society for a long time about wolves hopefully can be dispelled a little bit, but it's even heightened in this last year or 2 years or so now. And I say, read the book, Wolf Island, get a better understanding, a clearer idea of what the wolf are about, and a little bit about the moose too. So it was kind of fun. All right, just a couple of announcements for you as we close out. I do have a workshop going in the Palouse. Check it out on the website. We do have links down below in the description, in the show notes. and would just love to have you tag along. What we're going to be doing there is exploring your creativity, exploring the ideas you want to shoot in the Palouse. So whatever subject we have, going to help you achieve the images you want to shoot. But then we're going to be doing tons of post-production, and you're going to be able to take home some gallery quality prints. I did this in the past. In September 2020, I did this and had a fantastic time there doing this. And we're going to try and run that again here in the Palouse. It's going to be a fantastic experience. So take a look at that. Do let me know if you have any questions. I would love to answer them for you. And also Latitude Photography School, that's just on my website. The price is going up 18%. So it's going to rise from $24 a month to $29 a month. And that's going to happen January 2, 2022. So if that's something that you would be interested in taking advantage of, so you don't have to pay that increased price, then by all means, check it out. Take a look and see if that can work out for you. Latitude Photography School is all about travel outdoor photographers who want to do more with their images, understand your purpose for shooting images, and then honing your craft, honing your composition, honing your experience so you can create those beautiful photographs more consistently. And then, like I say here, through intentional analysis and refinement of your creative vision. All right, that's it for this episode. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. I do have a few more links down there, whether it's the Lens Rentals affiliate link. Many of you have used that. Thank you so much. I so appreciate it. The Think Tank Photo affiliate link. And then if there's something there for the donation that you want to think about doing, that's an option too. Check it out. I got all the links there further down below. Until next time, happy shooting.